I'm a retired professor of psychology, clinical, forensic, and also sociology. So basically, I'm interested. I've been studying and teaching human behavior, both individually and socially. Okay. I got my training from different universities in the United States. Let's say Vanderbilt University was one in late 70s, then Cornell, and then Great Britain, Leicester University, Open University, and then in Portugal, Coimbra University, and then in Spain, Salamanca and Santiago. So a little bit all over. And with the idea or the objective of trying to understand the human behavior in different aspects and dimensions of it, okay? Sexology, it's important because it's sexual behavior is of the most importance as far as well-being and happiness of humans. So I've been a clinical psychologist in private practice since 1992, so a little bit over 30 years. What else?
Well, if you don't mind, I'd love to go back to something you just mentioned, which you said you consider sexology the most important aspect of a human being's overall well-being.
One of the, yeah.
Why is that?
Well, because, we are sexual human beings or sexual animals. And as a result of that, our behavior is one way or the other influenced by sexuality, our hormones, our makeup, our education, our values. And of course, we do not exist and live in vacuum. We grow up in society, and society has values, has norms, has limits, and so on. So our behavior since childhood is controlled in a way by those values. You are supposed to do certain things and avoid other things, and not being able or forbidden to do other things, like in the sexual sphere, depending on the religious values and the social values, cultural values, your sex behavior depends a lot on the way you look at those things and abide by them or not. And society tends to determine and impose on people certain behaviors, like how do you affirm your own sexuality? How do you practice sexuality? Those things depend a lot on cultural values and social values. If you go to, let's say, a Muslim country currently, there are lots of taboos and limits to your own sexual expression as individuals. If you go to a Catholic country, that's another thing. If you go to a non-religious country, that's another thing. But all of those have limits, rules, and regulations that regulate your own behavior all around, including sex behavior, of course. And there, of course, one of the things that come to mind as far as sex behavior is concerned is so-called prostitution, having sex for money, type of thing. Well, that's very, very complex and a very complicated subject matter, because again, it depends on your own values and on the values imposed, prescribed by society. And at the same time, countries like the United States, where I lived for almost 10 years, in late 70s and all of 80s, almost all of 80s. Well, to me, American society on the whole is probably one of the most free societies I know of. And you have all sorts of behavior, all sorts of options. And since it is an individualistic society, individual is at the center of society, of the whole cultural system. Well, it's only acceptable, I would say, that individuals seek their own pleasure and well-being, no matter what. Of course, if prostitution is forbidden, you run risks if you go after it. You understand what I'm saying? It shouldn't be like that. I'm now getting involved into morality, and morality is associated with behavior and sex behavior as well. And I don't know whether that is a good idea or not. To me, it's probably not a good idea. If we look back in history, Greece, 2,000-3,000 years ago, not affected by then by religiosity, by Christianity, well, people were pretty much free to do whatever they want to do. There were rules and regulations, of course. You have slavery, and you have, the haves and have-nots, and so on. And the haves, those who have power, control behavior to a large extent. So there is no knowledge, at least as far as myself is concerned, of any society without rules. Every single society has rules and limits to our behavior. But when it comes to your own behavior, you are the master of yourself. You decide pretty much what you want to do. Who has the power to decide what is appropriate or inappropriate? Well, again, that's politics, basically. If there is a parliament somewhere in the world that decides that prostitution, let's say, coming back to it, is no longer forbidden, everybody does what he or she wants to do, and that's it. Because if you think a bit deeper in this matter, what is prostitution? I remember a famous author I read back in the 60s that said that family, the regular bourgeois family, the woman, the mother of the house, depending exclusively on the husband, she had to prostitute herself, in the sense that selling herself to the husband to please the husband, and not having real freedom to say, I'm not interested, and so on. And you think about violent behavior, there you have it. For two partners to be equal, they have to be independent economically, you see. And in most cases, it's not what happens, as you probably agree with me.
What are your thoughts on camming and the cam industry?
I see no problem. That's an individual thing, you see. If that suits you, why not? I don't think that the state society should intervene on that. If that's okay, no violence involved, no wrongdoing involved, no problem to me.
Well, so what we've noticed with our models is that, and our members, they do face a lot of societal stigma. So while this is
Yes, they do.
legal in most places, they still are punished for it through judgment.
Well, see, that's another dimension to the problem. It has been tried in different societies, kind of a political strategy of intervention on the part of the people that decide have a living on those situations or those selling their own bodies. There has been an attempt to create representation, political representation to those people, for those people, unions, and I think it's probably a way to go, because then again, well, I want to live my life like this. Who are you to tell me I shouldn't? Well, it's a matter of having representation, a vote in the parliament, what have you. Look at what's happening today with different types of sexual options, homosexual, trans, what have you. Well, nobody talks about those people who want to live on their own body, making money out of it. Well, that's a market. What is market about, basically? Well, you sell goods in a market. If there is somebody who buys it, what's the problem? Okay.
What we've realized is that, and not all, but many members that are engaging with the model either have severe disabilities, and so they're not able to have a typical social life. And so, but they still have those intimacy and sexual needs. Or maybe someone who just went through a really bad divorce and doesn't want a relationship, but they still have the needs.
You know, something I would say this is probably too dramatic, too extreme to some people. I can envision models, as you put it, you know, working in this field that to me are sex educators, you see, and sex counselors. We one distinction from my colleagues, you know, and myself. They perform. They applied what, you know, which I think is much better as a treatment, as a therapy, than just blah, blah, blah. That's what I do, you see. But then again, it's a very personal, individual thing. But I believe so. I believe that there are people that are not able to express themselves in a normal way, a healthy way, and they can do that through using or recurring to these people. I find it fine.
I'm curious, I again want to go back to how you started the conversation, which is that our sexuality is one of the main pillars for an overall whole life for a human being. And I'm curious your thoughts on what happens to us if we do not explore our sexuality in a way that is true to the individual. Because as you also mentioned, society, our governments, and everyone else basically gives us unspoken and spoken rules for how to express that part and many other parts of ourselves. So if we don't explore our true individual desires and needs, what are the consequences of that, if any?
Well, psychology, psychoanalysis, been studying that for quite some time now, just referring to Freud and so on. If you repress your own sex feelings and sex impulses, you can get problems, drastic, dramatic problems as far as personality and behavior are concerned.
What is the correlation or connection between just human connection and our sexuality and our intimate needs? Is it that we're very sexual and using sexuality in order to get connection? Or are we using connection in order to get sex? Which one do you think it is?
Well, I think both. It depends on the individual and the circumstances. We, as individuals, are not alone. We depend a lot on our psychological constructs like personality, but also on people surrounding us, on the circumstances, our lifestyle, this and that. See, there are people that need to have sex several times a day. There are people that need just once a month. It's such a diversity. And people should be free to do whatever they want, if at all possible, because I want to do something. If I don't have a partner, well, you can always use the internet, as I sometimes do, by the way. We tend to do things according, as I said before, our libido, our hormone situation, and so on. And of course, the stimuli and how I respond to them. If I see a pretty face like yourself, well, there is something inside of me that starts working on. And of course, there are rules, limits, and so on. And I have to use my prefrontal to say, okay, calm down. It's not appropriate. It's not the moment, what have you. But then again, there are more than what meets the eye, you see, that goes inside your head and so on. So again, there are no general solutions because there are no general problems. There are individual problems that need to be assessed individually. And, there are recipes. Well, you buy hundreds of textbooks telling you how to behave and so on. I doubt that it works for anybody because they talk about generalities. And generalities are good and bad at the same time. That does not answer. So again, coming back to the idea, I explained it a while ago, or described a while ago. An expert in sex, practical sex, is probably healthier to some individual than a 2-hour session of psychoanalysis or a sexology, okay? But then again, it depends on the person, depends on the individual, I tend to empathize with people that are in the market, if I may say so, because they perform a very useful role to people in need, you see. Different kinds of need, of course. You mentioned some person with difficulties, physical or otherwise, but I would say any individual. People don't resort to models or prostitutes or whatever you want to call it because they want to. They do that because probably they need to, which is a very different thing, you see.
I think that was really well said. And I do think that that is one of the biggest misconceptions about people who are in or engage with the sex industry. Is that it is not coming from a place of just want. There is somewhere where there's an underlying place of need.
One of the fascinating things about human beings is that it's not one single individual equal to the other. Mm-hmm. More than that, the same individual in different points in time behaves differently. And that's why it's so interesting, human behavior. It's highly unpredictable. Despite all the social science, the laws, theories, and so on. So far, no one theory explained or predicted human behavior in different realms, in different ways, in different societies, and so on. Underneath, we are all the same. But at the same time, we are all unique.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that makes life so fascinating, right? Is that we change, everyone's different.
It's unusual for a scholar, a college professor, to be apt to talk about these things because they are sensitive matters, and there are all sorts of taboos, rules, expectations, and so on. If I say this, people will speak and talk about me wrongly, or they get the wrong idea, this and that. And I guess people, what they should do is to tell as it is, the way they think and believe is so. That doesn't matter that tomorrow we might change your mind. That's okay too, no problem. One of the advantages of being retired, I do not depend on the university or on anyone else, which gives me freedom to think and tell what I think it's true or it's my idea, which is a good feeling, really.
Yeah, I think a lot of people really want to be able to live authentically like that, but just don't feel that they can. Hopefully
Yeah,
in the
I
future.
understand. I understand people talk to me about these things the same way I do, but it won't be able, not want to come to the table and say what I've been saying. Well, whether rightly or wrongly, that's what came to my mind. Maybe tomorrow, if we talked again, will be a bit different.
If you could tell the world one
Yeah.
thing about human sexuality that they don't yet seem to understand.
Well, I would say that people need to be honest with themselves, you see, and try to sense what they really feel and think about what is important and matters to them, you see. You mentioned the word authenticity a while ago. That's another way of putting it, you see. But you see, if you look at poetry, if you look at fiction, there people talk about things in a biased way that would be not able to talk about, in a straight face, you see. So they invent characters, plots, this and that, and poetry, and talk about trees and flowers and birds when they are talking about themselves, either what they did, what they didn't do, and how they relate to what is forbidden, taboos, this and that. Well, that's another way of looking at it. That also, is a way of keep the printing going and the books coming out, and why not? That's okay. That's okay. I think it would probably be more useful to have people coming to the fore and say, well, you are talking about this. When you talk about this rabbit behaving in a certain way, when you talk about Alice on the other side of the mirror, you are talking about human beings and human society. Okay, why not telling straight in the face of the other what you feel, what you think about it? Okay, I feel like having sex now. And why not? But you have to have the agreement of the other person. If the person does not agree, you have to be sure that you control yourself. You cannot use force, you cannot use other means to be violent in a way with the other person. So sex involves two at least, or even one individual. It's free, feels free about what he or she is doing.
That's very well said. Thank you so much. So my
Okay, okay, Ty. Was very nice. You're very pretty.
oh,
And thank you for having me for these minutes, talk about things that probably to a certain degree are nonsensical to many people.
again, we really appreciate your time. I think your voice adds a lot of value here. And I can see that you have learned a lot through your different experiences of teaching and your practice and everything else. So again, we really appreciate.
Tell me, may I ask you something?
Yes.
What is your background as far as college and so on? Psychology?
Oh, no, actually, I have my bachelor's degree in communications.
Okay. Well, that includes psychology and sociology, social sciences, of course. Communication is a social science, anyhow.
Right, right, yes.
Yeah, the way you present things, you ask questions and so on. Of course, it comes from a questionnaire to organize your thoughts and your questions. But the way you present it, I have this feeling that you're being sincere and a firm believer in what you say. And that's nice.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No, thank you. I really appreciate that.
Take care. Take care.